Hi guys, Mayu from Mayu's Catch here. At this point, I hope you've watched my previous two videos, the first of which is on fishing equipment. So I hope you've checked that out. If you haven't, please do. And then my second video was on fishing knots, where I showed you 7 of my favorite fishing knots. Now this video is all about fishing rigs. Now a rig basically is a contraption of some of the equipment that I've shown you in my previous video. So you would put those together to try and target a particular fish. Now if any of you guys is in customer service, you would know it's very important to know your client. They even call it the KYC, know your clients, know your customer, and that has never been more important than it is in the case of fishing. You need to understand the fish that you're fishing, and you need to create a rig that matches that behavior. Because if you don't, your chances of catching that fish are diminished drastically. For example, carp is a bottom feeder. So you need to make a rig that takes your bait all the way down to the bottom and allows the carp to get your bait there. Catfish is also a bottom feeder. So your rig also needs to go down to the bottom and the fish will be there. Although sometimes they'll pick baits in mid-water as well. And tilapia, oh my gosh, tilapia is a very sensitive fish. They are not bottom feeders like carp and catfish. They are mid-water feeders. So you need to know where they are on a specific day and you build a rig for that. These rigs should ideally help you to be able to start catching some carp, catfish, and tilapia. Check this out. The first rig I'll be showing you is called a sliding Ridley Trace. There's a slightly different variation of it which I also tie called the fixed Rietvlei Trace. No sliding. This rig is named after a dam in South Africa, although it can catch carp anywhere. Now to tie this trace, you will need a slightly stronger line. So this is an 11 kilogram line and I'll be using it to tie my shaft line. These slightly weaker lines will be my hook lines. And then these are barrel swivels. And then we have our hooks. This is a size 3 and this is a size 5. That sounds weird, doesn't it? The bigger one is a size 3 and the smaller one is a size 5. Hook sizes are quite tricky to understand. The higher the number goes, the smaller the hook gets. So with this being a 5, the next one, which is a 6, would be even smaller. And it goes all the way to number 32, which is basically a micro hook. Now the next one on this side would be a size 4, and then a size 3, and then a 2 will be bigger, then a 1 would be bigger. And then when it gets to this point, it actually now flips. The higher the number goes, the bigger the hook gets. But then it has a 0 at the end. So it would be a 1/0, or what we like to call 1/0. A 1/0 would then be bigger, then a 2/0 bigger, and so on. A size 3 and a size 5 work perfectly for carp. And then these here will be the 2 different weights I'll be using. This here is called a link, and the link goes together with the link weight, and you will see how that works. This, on the other hand, I like to call a cage, and the cage in this case will serve as the weight. And then there are others which can basically do exactly the same thing. You just need something to build your bait on. They just differ in style and weight, so you can find whatever looks similar in your part of the world and use it. And then we have our nail clippers. For this one here, I'll be using my pimped out nail clipper. Oh, and you'd also need beads. You'd need 2 beads per trace. The first thing I'll be tying is my shaft line. And the first knot I will tie on that shaft line is a figure of 8 knot. You take your line and you make a loop. You take your loop over, then under, and then through the other loop. And as you pull it, it gets tighter and tighter. Now you have this loop over here. As always, you cut off your tag end. The next thing you would add is a bead. After that, you'd add a swivel. And then for the trace with the hook link, you'd add the hook link. Then the second bead. And then you can determine how long you want your shaft line to be. The next thing you add is the second swivel. Now, once you've added the second swivel, this is what you should have. With your second swivel being the end of your shaft line, I'll tie a clinch knot. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now the tag end goes through the loop. Remember, moisture. And you'd simply pull tight and that line will come down on itself. So now, this is what you have. You have a bead, you have a swivel, you have your hook link, you have another bead, and all the way over here, you have the second swivel. Now, this is when you tie your hooks. So for that, we bring back our lighter lines. The first one is the knotless knot. You feed the line through the front of the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You take the other end and you feed it through the back of the eye. You clip off the tag end. Now to the swivel, I'll be tying a clinch knot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Moisture. And this is when a pimped out nail clipper comes in handy, because I'd simply take the hook on my nail clipper, hook it into the hook and pull. And this is what happens. And there, a solid clinch knot. Now for the second hook, I'll be tying a clinch knot both to the swivel and to the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Remember the moisture? And pull. Now to tie the other end to the other hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Moisture and pull. And now the trace is tied, but one thing is still missing, and that is the link weight. Now the way to fit this on, you see this cutout piece here? You feed the line through that above the hook link, and you simply slide the hook link into the space in the middle, and this will serve as your weight. And then you'd build your bait ball around this weight and you can cast it in. Let's say you want to go a further distance than this weight can go. You can simply remove this, take a bigger weight, feed the line through, and the link through the middle. Now you have a slightly heavier weight. They do come in heavier weights than this one. You can simply change the weight again to cast even farther. So this is one way of tying the trace. Now, let's say you were using the cage instead of the link and the link weight. This is what it would look like. Exactly the same procedure. You have your figure of 8 knot with the loop. You have a bead. You have a swivel. Then instead of the link, you now have the cage. And then the other bead. And then the other swivel. Now, you may be asking yourself, why the beads? The beads are there to protect the knots. With this being the weight, imagine the weight hitting directly into the knot. Over time, that weight will damage that knot, and that knot will loosen up or break. So you have the bead on both sides to protect the knots. The bead will also help the rotation of this swivel, so it will rotate nice and easy without possibly snagging into the knot. And once again, you would simply tie your hook lines onto both this swivel and this swivel, just like you did with the link. And to your main line, you'd tie a snap swivel. So I'll tie on a clinch knot. Now with my clinch knot on, I would simply open the snap, feed my rig through, close the snap, and that is the sliding Rietvlei Trace, which I use as my carp rig. Now, let's fish. And secondly, my catfish rig. So for this fish here, it's very important that you know that you're dealing with a very strong fish. The fish is basically a head and muscle. So you need to be ready with strong stuff. Otherwise, they'll just break your stuff and they'll be off. All right, so once again, here I have my lines. This would be my main line. Then this will be my hook line. And here we have what we call a sliding sinker. And it's called a sliding sinker because it has a hole in the middle. This allows the line to run right through the sinker. These beads will be to protect the knots that you tie, and then we'll have our hooks. So generally when I fish for catfish, for the smaller fish, I'd go between 2 and 4/0, and then for the bigger fish, I'd go between 6 and 8/0. And you'd also need a snap swivel. All right, so let's tie the rig. So the first thing I like to do is I take my main line and I feed the sliding sinker onto it. So the main line goes through the sliding sinker, comes out the other end, and then follow this up with a bead. So I like to tie this end to a snap swivel. I will be tying an improved clinch knot. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the bead is there to protect the knot from the sinker, which is sliding up and down your main line. And then we move to the hook line. And for that, I'll be tying a clinch knot to the hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Tag end through the loop, moisture, and pull. Now, I generally like to make this about 30 to 45 centimeters. And on the other end, I'll make a figure of 8 knot. A clinch knot on this side, a figure of 8 knot on this side, and then you bring back your main line with the sliding sinker and the snap swivel. You open the snap, you feed the loop through, and you close the snap. And there, you're good to go. Now, the benefit of the sliding sinker is sometimes when catfish feel the weight of the sinker, they will just let go of the bait. And the hook might not have set yet, and you will lose the fish. So this allows for the fish to run with the bait and not feel the weight of the sinker. While on the other side, the fisherman will see the line running, knowing that he has a fish on, and he will simply react on that side to set the hook properly in the mouth of the fish. But then I don't always use this setup, and that is because sometimes the sinker can get stuck. So if you have a lot of structure in the water you're fishing in, if the sinker gets stuck, the line will simply just run through the stuck sinker. So although you have a fish on, the sinker is stuck. And if it's stuck really good, you might just end up losing that fish. So I prefer to use a slightly different rig, and I will show that to you right now. So in this other setup, I will still tie my swivel to my main line, but this time there is no sliding sinker. And I'll tie it on with the improved clinch knot once again. So now my swivel is tied to my main line, but there is no sliding sinker. And then with my hook line, I'll tie a clinch knot, but you can also tie the polymer knot or the egg loop knot. It all depends on the bait that I'm fishing with. Now, remember, if you're fishing with chicken liver, it will be great for you to tie an egg loop knot in this case. Then you will not have your chicken liver flying off the hook. If you don't know how to tie any of those other knots I mentioned, please be sure to check out my video on my 7 favorite fishing knots. So for this one, it's just a clinch knot. So my clinch knot is on, and then the next thing will be a bead. You have your bead, and then that is followed with the sliding sinker. And as you can see, that bead is protecting that knot from that sinker. And then another bead. And this second bead is to protect the figure of 8 knot, which I will be tying on the other end of the line. So what you have is you have your hook, you have your knot, you have a bead, you have your sliding sinker, you have another bead, and then you have your figure of 8 knot. So that if the sliding sinker were to slide backward, the bead would protect it from being damaged. And then the loop from the figure of 8 knot, you'd simply connect that to your snap swivel, which is on your main line, and close the swivel. So now you're connected. Now remember what I didn't like from the other rig? It was when the sinker gets stuck and doesn't get unstuck because the main line simply runs through it. But in this case, if it gets stuck, it will stop on this side because this is only on the hook line, while the fish will be on the other end. So somewhere between the fisherman and the fish, you stand a chance of actually getting this sinker unstuck. This one has a little bit of a fail safe, while the other one, once the sinker is stuck, the line will just simply run through it. Now, last but not least, my tilapia rig. Tilapia are really sensitive fish, so the lighter the line you can tie for this, the better. But then you will have a nice fight on your hands because you can't really bully them too much because you'll just snap your line. So for this one, I have my 3-way swivel here because I either use a 3-way swivel or I tie my T knot. This hook size is a size 4, but if I'll go smaller, maybe I'll do a size 5. I would use a sinker like this. So a nice little small sinker where I can tie a knot just to the top of it. And they generally feed close to the bank, so you don't have to cast very far. Sometimes you may have to put a float and have this rig up top, or you can let the sinker take it down to the bottom with your bait slightly elevated from your sinker. If I use a T-swivel, most likely wouldn't use one this big because this is for much stronger fish. I would use one smaller, but the concept is exactly the same. This will then be tied to my main line. This will be my hook line, and this will be my sinker line. And I will simply tie a clinch knot to each one of the three. Moisture, pull tight. And then here, perhaps you go a 4 kilogram line, a 3 kilogram line, but a very thin line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Feed it through. Moisture. Now the line to your sinker. Ideally, your hook line should be stronger than your sinker line. And that is so that if your sinker gets stuck, your sinker can break off, but then if you have a fish on, you don't lose the fish. So again, I'll tie a clinch knot to that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Feed it through, moisture, and pull. Then you take your hook and tie it to the hook line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Tag end through the loop, moisture. Now remember, with the tilapia being a mid feeder, not a bottom feeder, ideally your sinker line should be longer than your hook line. So this line would be a little bit longer than your hook line. Let's say you'd now tie your sinker here. Feed the sinker through. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Feed it through the loop. Moisture. And tighten. So this is what you have. If you have used the T-swivel or the three-way swivel, you have this part going to your main line, you have this going to your hook, and you have this going to your sinker. And this is the tilapia rig with the three-way swivel. Now, in a situation where you do not have a T or a three-way swivel, then you tie the T knot. Once again, I'll refer you to my video on fishing knots to see how this knot is tied, but I'll tie it again very quickly right now. You take your line and you make a loop. Now you tie overhand knots. The more you make, the longer the tail of the T. So that's the second, that's the third, that's the fourth, and that's the fifth. Moisture. We cross and we make wraps. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm making 10 wraps, 10. Feed the loop through the middle and pull down. And there you have your T knot. Now you take your loop and you feed your loop through the eye of the hook. And this time, let's tie a polymer knot. So you make a simple overhand knot. And then you feed the hook through the loop. And you cinch it tight. Now there is no tag end to cut off in this case. After you've tied your hook on, this is what you should have. The hook is coming from the tail of the T. Now if you're worried about the two lines, you could actually trim one off, in which case this doesn't have to be a polymer knot, it could actually be a clinch knot. And then on this side, this would be the line going to your main line, and I just like to tie a figure of 8 knot so that I can link it to a snap swivel, which is on my main line. Snap swivel coming from my main line, hook, done. Going back down, we have our knot, and then the second line, you'd tie this to your sinker. This is the rig in its entirety. Snap swivel, coming down to the rig, where first we have the hook, and then we have the sinker. And this is what I like to use for my tilapia. And that is it. This brings the series on the intricacies of fishing to an end. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far, but if you haven't checked out the previous 2 episodes, by all means check out part 1, which was on fishing equipment, part 2 on fishing knots, and then this one. I hope you've enjoyed it, and those are the rigs that I like to tie for the species that I fish for, and see you guys soon. Fish on.